data is like the new oil. You got to be able to extract it, refine it, and monetize it. That could be for us, or that could be for an enterprise. But the hardest part is a lot of times the very front end of that. How can I get the data out of the source? How can I refine it to understand what is usable and what is noise? And then ultimately, how do I digest that data to give it to the end user so that they see value? It's difficult to do that.
Cash flow. Cash flow. Did you clear your cash flow?
Thanks for coming on today. I'm super excited to dive into your past here. You've got an interesting, career trajectory coming out of the .com era. Currently you're the CEO of Uptake. You guys are a predictive analytics platform for the trucking industry. So let's just dive in. Let's start there, where you're at now. We can maybe weave in some of the stories, from etoys.com and cars.com. But let's start with Uptake. If you can kind of tell me about what you do there.
Yeah, so I'm the CEO of the company, and also one of our board members. I've known our founder and our executive chairman, Brad Keywell, for probably almost close to 10 years now. So we had done a previous venture together where we were both co-founders of that company as well. And and so we're, today, we're essentially reinventing, let's call it fleet maintenance. It's not something that is typically out in front of the transportation sector. Usually you're reading now about whether it's zero emission vehicles or autonomy or, all the different things that are happening with the actual truck. The actual maintenance of the truck really hasn't been reinvented in a very, very long time, right? And so what we're doing is using data to essentially help the fleet maintenance operations proactively schedule repairs, reduce risk, I believe increase driver happiness, so ultimately driver retention, which we know is a big deal. And also, I think, retain technicians. I think technicians seeing or having the ability to proactively work on a truck with the right part at the right time, and having that vehicle in the shop so it avoids downtime is a big deal. And so, that's what we're doing right now. We do that for both what we call commercial, so everything that's on the road that you and I see, and then we're also doing it within the government sector as well.
Cool. And one thing that really stands out to me, like I love these unsexy businesses, these things that are like under the hood that just are not, consumer facing. They're just, sort of like data plays behind the scenes, making companies work. There's a good example, this company called SEI here in outside of Philadelphia. They're like the back end for banks. They kind of build like this back-end database system that's, it's kind of old school, I think, at this point, but they're like a multi-billion-dollar company, and they just like power the back-end systems that banks use. So I love these, like, some of these companies just get massive. And what strikes me is that you are at, you started in this .com era, this like consumer kind of website.com era with like etoys.com. I think you were at cars.com, apartments.com. So these are all like super consumery businesses, e-commerce and, consumer interactive businesses. And like this, this transition to Uptake, it's like very different from what you were doing before. Like, does that strike you ever that, the difference is there?
Yeah, I mean, it is, and it is. Yeah, yes, for sure. If you were just looking at my resume and or you looking at my LinkedIn profile, whatever, I've had this affinity to probably SaaS indirectly, building SaaS products probably within either marketplaces or building it within consumer products. But I love the SaaS space. I love the ability to be able to shape a product and take it to market and, watch that flywheel catch, as they always say. And then, basically, you get your first to your 50 to your 500 to your 5,000, whether it's users or customers or whatever it might be. That's what drives me, honestly. Building teams, being around product, being around go to market. And I know this is, probably an overplayed term, but I 100% subscribe to failing fast. Like, I have no problems getting something out there, seeing if it works, and if it doesn't, pivot as quickly as you can into the next thing, and just continue to try until you can figure out what the right recipe is. And that's kind of been my career as well. So it's been, yeah, I absolutely love the space.
Yeah, I totally get that. There's nothing more satisfying than like having all your pipeline metrics and then, making a bet, like taking a bet in your business. Maybe it's a marketing bet or some sort of like, changing the way you like changing your pricing model or something, and just making a bet and then tracking those metrics all the way down through your funnel, and then like, to your P&L, like the ultimate metric, and seeing, how it impacts cash flow and profitability. There's literally nothing more satisfying for me than to see that. Obviously it's like some typically like multi-month to kind of see that trickle all the way through all those stages. But what are some of like I'm really curious, like from like a cars.com or an apartments.com, I would assume there's probably like pretty similar KPIs that you would measure at, the most important, like the 3 or 5 most important KPIs there, versus an Uptake. I have to imagine, coming from these sort of like consumer e-commerce or marketplace businesses to a B2B analytics platform for a super specific industrial niche. I have to imagine that like the KPIs are drastically different. Is that true? And like, what are they?
That is accurate. So, I would say cars.com and apartments.com are leading indicator, although not always leading. I think we lived and died really by our net promoter score, right? So how happy were the customers? How happy were the customers using the site, and how happy were the dealers and the multifamily sort of owners that were ultimately advertising, or the apartment managers that, how happy were they with the experience overall, right? So I would say that was the ultimate. Then you had basically like units, so you could have like your dealer account, your auto, how many cars do we have listed on the site, and then you could go down the funnel all the way into like the actual products, right? Like how long were people on the site? What's the abandon rate? How many leads came in? The thing that I think is tough when you're in a consumer world like that, and I don't care if it's paid per click or it's subscription or whatever it is, you're constantly defending value, always defending value, right? You're defending value with the ultimate buyer of the solution to say, well, you promised me 40 leads a month and I got 30, or I got 50, but 50 were junk. Well, how do you know they were junk? And like, so you're in that constant mode of defending value, and it's difficult, right? It's really difficult on sales. It's difficult on support and operations. So, that net promoter score a lot of times is important, and customer satisfaction. It's ultimately using the product. At Uptake, it's a little different. It's a couple things. One is internally, I would say what we're looking at is like assets under management, right? Comes right away. It's like, okay, do we have, how many trucks are we monitoring on a daily basis? Okay, we're monitoring 100,000. How do you get to 200,000? How do you get to 1 million?
You call that AUM? Like,
yeah,
you would consider
yeah. Exactly. Yep.
Interesting.
So there's assets under management, and then what we call, it's a horrible acronym, but ARPU, right? So it's average revenue per unit. So how much revenue are we getting per truck, price per truck per month, right? In a typical subscription model. Our customer success team does do net promoter score, but a little bit different than cars and apartments, where it's really sort of on an individual customer basis. And how happy are they with the service and the product? And then we've got an amazing customer success team. They go actually really deep too in true usage of the product. And here's the big difference between a consumer and really sort of like a SaaS service offering like we're doing. When a truck this could be on either direction. When a truck fires an insight, the precision has got to be great. for them to continue to use the product. Because think about it, if the truck comes in to the shop and it doesn't have a problem, what do you think the driver's disposition is for the next time that alert happens? And they're like, hey, you got to get the truck in, right? There, it's like, well, you told me that last time. On the flip side, there's many times where the driver doesn't see something on the dashboard, and we're like, we've seen this pattern on 1,000 other trucks, and this is ultimately what's going to happen. Get the truck in the next week. Now, this is depending on severity. They get the truck in, and they're like, you would have been broken down within a week. And that's my favorite story, by the way, right? And that then gets the driver more convinced on the services, the software that the fleet operator is using. And the next time that call comes in, they don't question it. And those metrics are soft metrics, but like I go back to our customer success team working with each customer on a monthly basis and then doing roll up quarterly reports. Like that's the fun stuff, to going back to what you and I were talking about when you're building the product and you want to enhance the product. Those are the types of metrics we really dive into or look at.
I want to take a quick break from the episode and say, if you're enjoying this content, the best way you can say thank you is to subscribe. So if you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. And if you're on one of the podcast platforms, hit the subscribe button there as well. And also share it out to your friends and colleagues. If you find this content useful and you think other people will enjoy it as well, please send it out. And back to the episode. Perception is so critical. Like I think there's a book called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. I think that's what it's called. The production team will like research it and put it into the show notes. But essentially, it talks about this idea of once somebody forms, like the initial first impression is really critical. Like that first impression, it's sort of like an empty ball, it's just a ball of clay that can be molded. And once that first impression is created, it's really, really hard to undo that. Like there's kind of like, once you put once a customer or a user puts your brand into a box, like it's really hard to get out of that box. And if the truck driver has like two experiences or even potentially one experience where they get that false flag, they come in and they're like, why am I here? And there's nothing wrong. I imagine that's like really hard to undo that. And they almost just probably just like have an impression in their head of, what the product is that, probably is hard to undo. So that's like, I'm sure there's like a lot of fine tuning. I'd love to kind of dive into that a little bit more, but I'm sure there's a lot of fine tuning in your product to both eliminate those false flags while also not missing real important signatures that are indicative with predicting a failure.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And it doesn't take many of those false failures for them to say, why am I using this product? Right. Like, and so that's where the fine tuning, it's why we, I put a lot of emphasis on, the team that we have. Our data science team is phenomenal. They've been doing this for, the head of our data science team has been with Uptake for 8 years, since literally the very, very beginning. And he has seen everything from, a locomotive to a windmill to a nuclear reactor to,
you guys are working on all those?
We have in the past. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. We were at different points of time over the maturity of the company. We have covered the gamut on those types of assets.
Okay. I'm sorry I took you off track, but so you eventually decided to just go into trucks as a
yeah, and it might be just take 2 minutes and just really kind of, I'll tell you the quick story is, Brad Keywell, our founder and our executive chairman, was in an event with the former CEO of Caterpillar, and he asked them, he said, where do all your millions of machines that are around the world, where's all that data go at the end of the day? And I'm loosely like telling the story, but he basically, for all intents and purposes, said, hey, goes to Peoria, Illinois at headquarters, and it like sort of rots. Like we don't do much with it. And the light bulb really kind of went off for Brad to put together a team. And he asked them, he just said, hey, could I have one asset? Like just to try, like my theory that there could be something that we could do to help with preventative or predictive maintenance, and it was a locomotive. And they worked on basically from dissecting the different parts of the locomotive, and what they figured out was there was a way to look really at wheels and bearings and all the different parts that make the locomotive roll, and they predicted failure of a specific part, and that's what really sort of launched Uptake. In 2014, that's what launched our company.
Awesome. When was it founded? Around the same time?
2014 is when they did the test, and then it was late 2014, early 2015. Uptake was formed, and
so that is kind of like the inception story of the company, then.
Yeah, what was kind of fun for me personally, and my identity back to Uptake was we were sort of in this conference room, and one half of the conference room was Uptake with like 3 or 4 guys, and I was building an automotive analytics startup on the other end of the table on the same floor. They jetted out and hired 500 people to kind of like go build this this massive entity under Cat to start with Cat. And basically I launched out to build like a team of 20 or 30 to do this analytics, but we were always in the same floor in the same fabric, for the most part. So what I got to see from like true data science, and what I got to see from how to manage like these really large enterprise accounts, I got to see it like front and center, which was amazing and truly helped me when I was building Driven, to really kind of figure out, okay, if I'm going to go work with an OEM, or I'm going to go work with a Penske or a CarMax dealership group, being able to have that sort of access to those people with an Uptake was huge.
That's cool. Wait, is that other company, that Caterpillar company, still around, or what's the story there?
No, the long and short of it is, without getting into too much detail, is that CEO that Brad and team were working with retired. Another CEO came in. There was sort of a difference of opinion on, the direction and what Caterpillar wanted to do with the data. And so the relationship ended up getting dissolved, but we kept all the IP. And a lot of we don't do anything really anymore in ag. We don't do much in rail at this point. So that was really sort of coming in to the company. So I got brought in 2020. Really, the idea was to get laser focused, and I saw the upside. I saw the upside in transportation for a lot of reasons. The lack of production, the lack of technicians, the lack of drivers, the lack of part availability. And we were just sitting on like some amazing IP that had been built over the, I guess, 5-6 years prior to me arriving. And I was like, God, if we could package this up and start using it, we could take this to market. And we had a great head start. So it was fantastic for me coming in and having all that infrastructure and all that IP readily available to go use.
Cool. I took you off track about 5 minutes ago. You were just wrapping up the part about like the false flags and how you kind of handle that fine tuning and make sure that you don't lose the truck drivers or the technicians with too many of those false predictions.
Yeah. So we have hundreds of insights, right, that are basically broken down and packaged into, if you think of after treatment, you think of coolant, you think of basically everything in sort of the engine out to like the brakes. Those insights are they're packaged up, and every time an insight fires, we catalog it, we look at it. And so the reason why that assets under management metric I was telling you about is really sort of at the top is the more assets we have that we're managing, the greater the learning, the greater the make, model, year, event base. The larger we can get of a data set, the better, right? And so these models just get more and more intelligent over time as we're seeing more data, and as we're seeing more data geographically too. So the Northeast might look very different than the Southeast. The type of the truck that's being driven, is it an owner operator? versus it's an employee of the company of the fleet. That has a lot to do with the truck as well, because the owner operator actually owns the truck. They're in that truck full time. They're not, somebody else isn't coming in and out of it on a full time basis. So the driver behavior is pretty consistent. But that's what really our data science team and our modeling team is constantly looking at is basically those insights that are firing on a daily basis. Is what result did it produce? What, for those that are very high or high, how are they reacted to? And I should probably explain this real quick and make it, I'll use this as an analogy. We're going back to the false flag idea. If you think of a truck and you think of all the parts and all the alerts that we could fire, it could be, a dozen a month or more. Well, how do you sort of reduce the noise as well? Because you can get for everything on our application from very high, meaning like you better get that truck in as soon as possible because you're gonna have a breakdown, till low. And here's the analogy. If you have a security system at home and the battery is starting to die on your window, you get an alert on your phone or you get an alert on the keypad. It's like, hey, you may want to change the battery. You're depending maybe where that window is. You'll change it, but it doesn't necessarily mean you got to change it right away. If somebody's breaking your front door down or breaking a window or coming in your house, you're getting called. Maybe your significant other is getting called, or the emergency contact's the police are on their way. Think of that analogy as like our very high to our low, right? And we could show you a lot of things about the truck. So what these fleet operators will do is they will take the low and the medium, and they'll sometimes weave that in for the next PM. And so when the truck driver brings it in, they're like, oh yeah, we had this all cataloged from the last month. We're going to do this maintenance in addition to what you brought the truck in for.
Yeah, that's smart. So I'm curious, like, it's how you talked a little bit about models and kind of training. So are you guys using a like machine learning model, and is it like a TensorFlow environment? And talk a little bit about that. I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, so we're using, it's 100% machine learning. It's what we have built is all internal. So we've got 52 patents that again cover a lot of previous sort of uptake, and then also cover what we do today. So that's the pure science. So what happens is that we work with the top, call it 5 telematics service providers or TSPs. That's the actual device in the truck. So we don't do anything in hardware. That's producing basically the signal. And then what we're looking at is whether it's a sensor or a fault on the truck. We take that data, we put our science then on top of that data, and we produce the result back to the end customer. So we're sort of complementing the TSPs in a joint manner, and then giving the data in a way that they can understand to the actual fleet operator or the fleet, basically the head of fleet maintenance, the person ultimately making this decision that says, wow, I got to either get that truck in, or I got to catalog it in a work order management system to ensure that truck gets this type of maintenance next time it's brought in.
Yeah. So so you guys are building your own models and kind of like building your own machine learning capabilities for the platform. Like what are some of like the things that, walk me through it, some examples of, for instance, you're predicting, I don't know what a common one is, but maybe like an axle failure or something like that. How would you
I'll give you one that is one that's pretty common. So in the bundle of insights, we call it after treatment, and there's one that's it's called a NOx sensor. It's the nitrogen oxide NOx sensor, and it's basically used to verify the efficiency of the catalytic reduction system. So it's a very, very important part of the engine. So we have a sensor on there. And so we can talk to, let's say, Geotab. Geotab is essentially sending us data back from the NOx sensor. We have built a model around that NOx sensor. And we essentially then can send the data back to the fleet operator that says, we're seeing anomalies, or we're seeing strange behavior with your knock sensor. This is the frequency we're seeing it. This is where we're seeing it in the time of day when the truck's being driven. And so then what will typically happen is the fleet operator will then give it to a technician. The technician will either say, yeah, you know what, we got to get this truck in. This is happening too frequently, or it's only happening once a week. Again, we'll catalog it. We got to get this truck in anyway for XYZ maintenance, and we'll get that. We'll look at the knock sensor in a month. It will all depend on the criticality of the alert.
So that's like pure sensor data from that one sensor. But I guess it's not enough that it would trigger a check engine light on the onboard computer. Is that right?
It could. No, absolutely could. The knock sensor could absolutely fire a light on, depending again on how frequent it was coming in, what was coming on. If that was happening every hour, or it was basically to the point where the knock sensor was having full on issues, that light will come on, and then obviously the technician will say, okay, we got to get the truck in. So if you take that knock sensor, we've got 188 more insights that are just like that one, that are cataloged, and everything from engine to engine cooling, to the chassis, to the transmission, to the exhaust, to the braking system. Basically, think of it about as 30 different packages that are roll-ups of that, almost 200 insights.
Yeah, and I'm sure like a big part of it, I have to imagine a big part of it is like detecting things that might not trigger a check engine light. Because the check engine light kicks on, it might be, maybe it's just like a warning check engine light. Maybe it's like your engine's about to blow up check engine light. But if you can catch those things like 3 months early when they're about to go into the shop for regular maintenance, so you can like nip it in the bud then, as opposed to waiting till you're on a 2,000-mile haul or something, like that's probably the strategy there, right?
You hit the nail on the head. That's exactly right. And it doesn't have to be a check engine light to come on. The sensor could be firing and showing things that are happening with the truck way ahead of time before that light comes on. And that's again where the science comes on to say, we're seeing variable XYZ. We've seen this, I'm using 1,000 times on a like make model, which leads to this type of failure. Alert the fleet technician that this problem is happening or going to happen, and they get the driver in. What's really hard a lot of times is the driver just believes the light. The light has to be on. So think of like the person on the other end calling. We've got to give them a great application experience, or we got to give them the data that gets into their BI system or whatever system they're using as system of record, to say, here's every reason why you need. So we call it recommended actions. Here's every reason why you need to get this truck in.
And it's not like you guys aren't the shop facility, right? You're not the maintenance facility. So it's not like there's your incentive is to warn the customer, warn the driver, and warn the fleet technicians ahead of time that they need to take action, right?
We're not communicating directly with the driver, like per se. Like we don't send like anything to like their mobile device or anything else. We're sending it to the person that is actually managing the fleet itself. So all the tech, usually the way it works is, it depends on the size of the fleet, right? But we've got a customer that has 19 repair facilities around the United States. They've got 1,200 trucks in their fleet. They have one VP of fleet operations, and then he has basically 19 shop fleet managers. And then he has like 300 technicians that are across those 19. So the idea is that our customer is his 19 managers that we're sending the alert. They're using the application, and then they're working with the technician and say, hey, I'm seeing this, this, and this. We got to get the driver in. The technician's not making the call. It's usually what we call a virtual technician or it's a call center, but it's somebody that's outbound dialing to the driver to get the driver convinced to bring the truck in. And
Yeah, interesting.
here's what I love. This is what I absolutely love about the space. Because this is so new, there's jobs that are going to get created over the next 3 to 4 years. And I think, I mean, it's happening right now, but I think it's going to be way more commonplace that this virtual technician role will be like a normal role on LinkedIn. And what it'll be is it'll be the technician that has 15, 20 years experience on a truck, turning a wrench or, diagnosing an engine, whatever it might be. And they're using this, they're very familiar with analytics, they're very familiar with these applications, and they are working with a driver, whether it's through mobile or a call or whatever it might be, but to basically explain in very technical detail of why the driver is going to have a problem.
Yeah, and so I want to like zoom out for a second here too. This is really interesting to me. I was telling you on our last call together, I was telling you about my friend Ben Johnson, who has the company Freya Systems here in the Philly area, and they do similar stuff to what you guys are doing. They're more of a service model, and they do it specifically for helicopters and like military helicopters and I think they do military planes as well, but definitely focus on military helicopters from what I understand. So that's like a super specific niche, and like definitely you don't want a helicopter to fail because it'll fall out of the sky. So I think that this predictive maintenance stuff is really important there. But what other industries, like what other use cases besides truck fleets and military aviation vehicles? What other use cases do we have for this sort of thing? One I heard a long time ago was a guy at a startup event I went to. This is probably 8 years ago. Was doing it for residential plumbing systems. Essentially, there was like IoT sensors he would put all over your house, and it would detect leaks or like issues with like your water heater potentially, and all these different things. But what other, I don't know if the startup ever got traction, so maybe that's not a good use case. But what other use cases do you know of?
There's hundreds. I mean, literally hundreds, and I'll give you maybe 3 or 4 that are top of mind. A wind farm that you see down when you're driving down the highway. That wind farm is being operated usually by a third party, right? So somebody owns that wind farm, but the actual maintenance of those windmills, a bird hits it, it stops spinning at the rotation, ice gets on the blade. The rotor fails inside. Every single one of those parts can be monitored via IoT. And that's a big deal because depending on the rotation is what ultimately is creating the electricity. So the monitoring of all those different parts to ensure that it can rotate at the necessary speed to create the power, that's a big deal, right? And and also the number of windmills working in harmony is important. So you got 10 mills out of a farm of 50. Okay, that's a problem. You got one windmill out of the farm of 50. That's less of a problem. So you got wind, transformers on your street. Huge deal. All sensor, all IoT based. Think about the transformer that is in on the governor's street of your community.
Funny you bring that up. I live in downtown Philadelphia, and there was one that caught on fire at the building across the street from me. The building got evacuated a few weeks ago, and now they're tearing up the street at 15th and Walnut in Philadelphia. And then years ago, I lived in a different building like 10 blocks away, and I think a transformer caught a gas line on fire, and it blew up, and like a manhole cover launched. It was under a dumpster. It like launched the dumpster, like ripped the front of this building off, and it was like this. It was the laundromat that I dropped my clothes off at, and the lady who ran the front desk just like happened to walk to the back right when it happened, and otherwise she would have been like, obviously killed from that explosion. So she got super lucky, but that was like I remember I was on the 26th floor, and I remember thinking like I heard this huge explosion. I thought a truck like crashed into the building because I could feel my bed shake, and it was that transformer gas explosion across the street.
Yeah, so really let's call it utility. You can call it wind. You can do water treatment plants. You can do aviation. You can do. We've done stuff with nuclear. We've done stuff on oil rigs for for the super majors in gas. Um, it. I mean, really, truly is endless. And I mean, Brad's vision at the end of the day when he was building Uptake was he wanted to connect every asset in the world. His belief was that the world would be a better place if you could connect basically every human, the humans with the assets and data. So if you could essentially bring those three together, you can make the world a better place. And I fully subscribe to it. It's a little bit more difficult to connect every asset in the world, right? But I subscribe to the idea. We have narrowed the focus now into transportation because the criticality to our supply chain and ultimately, it's pretty important to our livelihood right now. But yeah, there's many. I gave you the locomotive, right? That's an easy one. But there's the number of sensors going on just to things that pivot, to things that move, to things that process, the things that are just in our common day to day. It's happening by the nanosecond. The amount that are getting produced and getting added into the ecosystem.
You're saying new sensors coming online with existing like new equipment being installed or things being plugged in?
Correct.
Interesting. Yeah, it's I heard a stat that I don't know if it was every year or every 2 years, more data is created than all data that has previously been created.
Right. I mean, my background in automotive, I spent a lot of time with the OEMs after our company was acquired and learning even about sensor data on cars, on vehicles, and that's ultimately, what's driving the autonomy side is with the ability for every sensor to look at what the vehicle is doing at all times. Hundreds of sensors, thousands of data points, millions and millions of hundreds of thousands of petabytes getting created probably every month now, within the automotive sector. So, the interesting thing is we're producing a lot of data to what you just said. Let's just say in 2 years, we produce more data than, all previously combined. That's great, but what do you do with it? And that's always the hardest part about what we do is we get a lot of data, but you got to get to the source. I've used this analogy before: is data's like the new oil. You got to be able to extract it, refine it, and monetize it, right? And that could be for us, or that could be for an enterprise. But the hardest part is a lot of times the very front end of that. How can I get the data out of the source? How can I refine it to understand what is usable and what is noise? And then ultimately, how do I digest that data to give it to the end user so that they see value? That it's difficult to do that.
Yeah, there's like in the software industry, there's some companies that are kind of similar to what you're doing, but for software, like there's Splunk and Sentry and New Relic, and they're kind of doing, sort of like predictive maintenance for software applications and for cloud environments. And I can think back 15 years ago writing software, and, you'd write like a raw PHP application, no framework. Anything you wanted logged, you had to literally write code to make logs. And, so not that, some logging was happening. You had like your server logs, like error logs and access logs and secure logs on Linux and that sort of thing, like Apache logs. But there wasn't like a lot of logs happening. And now you use a framework like Laravel or like, Ruby on Rails or something, and they spit out a bunch of logs. You've got your AWS environment, that's spewing logs. You use one of these software packages like New Relic, and those are like spewing logs as well, like really robust logs. Like you click, an error and you go into it and it's like multiple pages with tabs and drill downs into functions and, variable contents, and they go like the logs are insanely deep. And so just even that, like thinking about how much more data a single software application produces now than it did 15 years ago, just like kind of like exhaust, I guess, like exhaust data just for like existing and running. It's just like spewing off all this exhaust data. That is even like mind blowing a little bit. And I'm sure like hardware devices are doing the same thing. They're running probably like Linux and embedded circuitry systems, and those systems are spewing off logs that are getting more and more robust. So that's, I'm sure, what you tap into to run your system.
Yeah, yeah. It's I can't speak to the what the tech team is doing in the sense of analyzing all that, or how they do it. But it's pretty funny. I do remember at cars.com, we were a beta user on Splunk. We
Oh
actually
yeah.
we had a free license for probably like 2 years on that, as long as we gave them back feedback. And I just remember being amazed at the simplicity and how quickly we could process that log data compared to what we were doing as like humans, and combing through it and looking at various different like we had a big scraper problem for a long time. And so I remember we were going through logs to figure out like how how to avoid it or how to stop it, and Spunk was awesome.
It's amazing how fast things evolve. Like there's just in all of business, like new ideologies, new technologies, new frameworks, new systems. I was thinking about it last night. I was listening to a podcast, the Acquired podcast, but they had a Jason Calacanis as the guest on the show. I don't know if you know Jason Calacanis from he's like forget it. He's a VC. He was like, one of the first investors in Uber, Airbnb, Calm. He has like 350 investments. He's a super well known like personality, but he was on. It was an older episode, but he was talking about like the first time he ever heard of an SPV, like a special purpose vehicle, and he was talking about like someone explaining to him the concept of an SPV. And I'm just thinking like, oh yeah, that's such a simple concept. Like, an SPV, for the listeners, if you don't know, it's a special purpose vehicle. It's like typically an LLC that you'll set up for like receiving investment from limited partners and then distributing that investment to, it's like basically for setting up an investment fund, you'll distribute the funds to other companies and then use the SPV to, manage like the distributions back to the investors. So it's like commonplace now. Like you can go to AngelList and spin up an SPV with a couple clicks. And but he was talking about like the concept of learning about it, like the first time he learned about it. And it's funny like how much like everything in life, whether it's like hardware technology, like trucks, or whether like physical vehicles, spacecraft, whatever, software technologies, SaaS companies, business systems and legal approaches and legal entities and all this stuff. Like everything's just advancing and building, and it's like every decade it's like we're all doing like totally different stuff than what we were doing the last decade.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, just think of even like the last year, right? I mean, with generative AI and chat GPT, and just like I mean, I just feel like, I mean, I would say like I'm technical in the sense of like I keep up with trends, but I'm starting to feel like my grandparents, like we had to show them like how to use the remote, right? Like on the TV, like it's moving fast.
I'm just
Really
starting to
fast.
have some moments like that. Like I'm starting to like I'm 34 now. I'm almost 35, so I'm starting to put myself around younger entrepreneurs that are like in their early 20s. Like it's almost kind of like getting some of that like secondhand intensity.
Yeah.
I want some of that like secondhand intensity to waft off on me to give me a second wind here. But I'm starting to surround myself around them, some of these younger entrepreneurs, and like they are, obviously like I have more experience than they do, just like I'm sure you have more experience than I do, but it's like that energy is just is incredible. And like some of the things that they're working on, like they're learning in the today paradigm versus like I learned in the 15-year ago paradigm, and now I have to like relearn what the new paradigm is, or they're just like learning it for the first time. So it's like they're not like dealing with the, I guess, the headwinds of like having to relearn something. So it's interesting. Like everything goes through these cycles. It's really interesting to watch it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I know it's, and it, even sector advancements, things that are happening in a lot of the sectors is really fun. In sectors that were way behind even 5 years ago, and you're starting to see like this, amazing catch up. It's another reason I like the transportation sector is it feels like it's probably 5 to 10 years behind automotive, and having sort of an automotive like being entrenched in automotive for close to 10 years. I got to see sort of the roadmap or the transformational roadmap that kind of took place over that time. And there's a lot of like learnings and stuff that can be applied into the trucking sector as well. So it's fun to work in this environment right now.
My brother has an auto repair shop out in Reading. They do like really, I think they do some really small light fleet stuff, like sub F350 kind of size stuff, and then they do a lot of like just regular old like consumer vehicles repairs. And I like the industry hasn't really changed. I always wonder, it's been like the same for so long, and I always think there has to be some disruption model. And like the one that I keep thinking of, and I'm not sure why no one's done it yet, or if someone's tried it and failed, maybe, I don't know. But like imagine this concept. They have those insurance companies where you plug the thing into your computer and then it like has, SIM enabled connectivity. So it'll connect up to the network and like report how hard you're braking and how hard you're accelerating, et cetera, et cetera. So they can price your insurance policy based on your habits. But why not do something like that, but with like an auto repair subscription? And then basically I think it would be like a marketplace, kind of like what you did with apartments.com, where you're the platform, and then you connect the consumers with the real estate people and the landlords and whatnot. But you essentially kind of have like this network of shops, maybe even like mobile technician shops that go and like service the vehicles. And you have like this predictive thing that's kind of like predicting the maintenance, and and then have it like more of a subscription model where you just pay like a monthly amount, kind of like part of, you could even maybe be like financed into your car payment too. Like maybe you could use like dealers to like just put that right into the car payment when they do the financing. But why doesn't that exist? I'm just curious.
It's probably resourcing on how to figure out how to connect it all, right? I mean, automotive is tricky. In a lot of people love just to jump in automotive because they think it's close to it's a $850 million TAM. And it's a massive TAM, right? And so you got a lot of money sitting out there with all these different product, services, everything from the manufacturer down.
That's the whole industry TAM, like including auto sales.
Yeah, I mean, it might even be more. It
seems small. Yeah,
I haven't looked at it in a while. It's the second from a GDP. It's the second in the United States behind housing. It's massive. So if you think of like, I don't know, what do we do? Probably 13 million new cars, and last year I think we sold 13 million new in the United States, and that might even be a little high.
What's the average price? Like what, 30,000 or something? Or
oh no, it's up. I think it's probably even 40 now.
40,000.
And then there's probably, I don't know, maybe 40 million used, 35 million used. But again, I haven't looked at the numbers in a really long time. So
I think that's in the billions.
What's that?
I think that's like, is that?
It should be like 850. I don't know what it was. Total.
I listened to a podcast called My First Million. One of their slogans is, "We don't do public math."
Yeah. I knew these numbers by heart a long time ago. But the you know it's what's tough in automotive specifically. It's very resource intensive. Like, and I'll even tell you, like when we built Driven, um, me and the co-founder would literally park our car. It'd be like the equivalent of you having in Northeast Philly, like in dealership row, right? Like we would just park our car here in Chicago. We'd walk up dealership row, and we'd ask if we could buy cars from them, like a wholesaler. And we'd have trucks ready, and we would literally just send cars to 300 miles away into markets that needed it. And we essentially just created like an arbitrage model. And that's how we started the company. And then we figured out how to do it technically.
That was
And then
cars.com.
No, this is Driven.
Driven, okay. And that's that's literally what you guys did, just bought cars cheap in one market and moved into a market.
It started that way, yeah. But our goal was, went to cars.com and got every car that was on their website that was used, not new, used. And then we went to Car Auction Services, which owns ADESA. So they had 65 auction sites, and we got every car running through the lane. So what we knew is we knew the retail price, we knew the wholesale price. And then what we started looking at is how long were vehicles staying on dealers' lots. So if it usually crossed over like 70, 75 days, it was going to be pretty difficult for them to sell it at a price point. We knew what the price ranges were. So we could go in and offer a little bit more than the wholesaler, a little less than they were going to get for retail, but kind of in this sweet spot that they would liquidate it that day to us. And our promise was that it wasn't going to stay in market. So we would actually ship that car. We did studies of where there was undersupplied markets, and we get those vehicles from the oversupplied market to the undersupplied market and just play a little bit of arbitrage. And we started finding the recipe for success, and we created 6 markets that we could basically trade vehicles in.
So I don't know if you know this story. I'll just do a quick, a short one for the listeners. But the Rothschilds family, they're like potentially they're considered to be potentially one of the wealthiest families of all history, based on, obviously not in today's dollars, but based on like what the GDP was back then and how much wealth they had amassed. And their entire business was it was like the late 1700s, early 1800s, all across Europe. They created the fastest horse network, like the fastest like horse. They could move horses across land faster than anybody, including governments. So what they did was essentially that was like the power, like that's like the internet. If you have the fastest internet connection faster than anybody else, like if you can get an email to California from New York faster than anybody else, that's like extreme power. And they would know, like if England was fighting a war, say in somewhere in like Eastern Europe, they would have that information back to London before the politicians of London knew whether they won or lost the war. They would know in London before like the actual like leaders of the country would know, king and queen and everything. And they basically built this like money arbitrage, I think it was like gold and silver and like foreign exchange arbitrage, where they would just move like assets across different cities. They would just know like what the price of things were in different cities at different times, and they would just like literally built this like giant arbitrage network. And they were making so much money so fast that they actually didn't even like know how much money they had or where the money was, because it was just moving around so much so fast. And they had no accounting system. But total side tangent. I love that story. And the way that you started talking about building Driven, like moving the cars around the country and like buying them in a cheap market, moving them to a more expensive market and selling them. That it just like a kind of triggered that story in my head. It's just such like a, again, it's like one of those unsexy things. Like you just find like these weird business opportunities and just like execute on them well. And it's really I love those stories.
Oh yeah, there's a lot out there, and automotive is just no different than transportation. There's so many niche little plays that you can find, whether it's in the hardware, it's in the software, it's in the services. It's in the dealership, for the consumer, for the technician. It's endless. 2021 it was 200 billion, all encompassing. That's everything in automotive, manufacturing to dealership to everything was 200 billion.
Yeah, just in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that seems right to me.
That's the United States.
Huge market. I mean, it's I have a friend who built a SaaS company called Bolt-on Technologies. They built a SaaS company that services, like the repair orders and the marketing platforms of the vehicles, and like, the technicians can like take pictures, like if they're in there, like they see a brake line broke and there's like, fluid or something, or like fluids leaking and it's all over the engine, they can snap a picture and then it just gets sent right to the customer's phone while they're in the waiting room. So
I've heard
it's
of
like,
that. Yeah.
you're familiar with it?
Yeah. I didn't know the name of the company, but yeah. So while the person's in the waiting room, it's like a more convincing sort of story to be able to show them what's going on underneath.
Yeah. So it's not like, the technician can like draw on it, like circle, like here's the fluid leaking all over, the bed of your engine or whatever. Like, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to like take this part off and replace this, and it's going to cost $300.
Yeah.
And then the customer's like, all right, well, shit, I have to do it. Like it's leaking fluid all over the place, as opposed to like someone just coming out and saying like, give me $300.
Yeah. No, that's a cool, very neat product, and definitely helpful for the, for the customer.
Yeah. But those businesses though, it's like that's just like a feature that like that's just like a no-brainer. It's like one of those features where the industry is just like doing it a certain way, and now that this feature exists, it's like it's such a no-brainer that like how did you operate all this time? I guess you could bring the customer back into the shop, and then that's like an insurance liability, and then you have to like tell them to climb under the car and like look at it. But how it's like, how did it exist before this? Now that this is here, it's one of those features that just kind of changes the whole game. But I think what you're doing is kind of like that. I think there's an element to this predictive maintenance thing, especially for critical infrastructure. And trucking is a critical infrastructure, but any kind of critical infrastructure, I think there's a really game-changing element to what you're working on.
Yeah, and it's greenfield, right? I mean, there's so many different directions, and honestly, as a leader of the company, the thing that if you asked 10 of my employees, said, what is the one word Kayne probably overuses, on a weekly, monthly basis, they would say it's the word focus. And I learned a very valuable lesson even at Driven, because the TAM was so big in automotive, and we were constantly being pressured to like, did you look at this? Did you look at this? Did you look at this? And you can boil the ocean, and you can basically get out of scope real quickly on what you're building or what you want to service. So it's really this idea of focus, and it's, let's be really good at one thing, right? And to me, it's precision of our data models to be able to give it to the decision maker and give confidence, right? Like that's what I'm trying to do. That's what we're trying to build every day, is that just our insights are the best in the business. And when somebody gets an insight, they're like, okay, I trust that. It's helped me dozens of times keep the drivers safe, keep the drivers happy, keep the truck on the road a little longer, helps me with parts, parts available, making sure that the parts readily forecasted, the part availability, and bringing that whole thing together. And believe me, we could go do a lot of other things for a lot of, we could go build work order management systems, and we could build PM scheduling software, but like there's other companies doing that, and there's nobody really, I think, doing what we're doing, because we've been doing it for 8 years.
Yeah, it's a good spot to be. Well, Kayne, anything you want to close on here? Any plugs or last items before we hop off?
No, I thank you for the interest in Uptake and just hearing the story, and appreciate it, and best of luck with everything you're doing, which I know is a lot as well.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, not a problem.
Cash flow? Did you clear your cash flow?